Well, hello and happy Friday. Welcome to my channel. Grab yourself a cup of tea, cup of coffee, and let's sit down and have a chat because today I am going to be planting up some bulbs in these pots. But first of all, I wanted to talk about that storm. Goodness. Now, if you've not been here before, my name's Jane and I'm a textile artist and I live right in the heart of Scotland. And last Friday, we had a terrible storm that came over Ireland and Northern Ireland and the whole of central Scotland. And it was the first time that I've ever been anywhere where there was a red warning and my mobile phone suddenly went off with a siren to tell me that, there was a danger to property and life and all of that kinds of thing. And goodness, it was wild. But here we were incredibly lucky. So first of all, luck. There was plenty of warning of this storm. So that meant that, could make sure that everything was secure. There was nothing lying around in the garden that might go up into the air. We could tie things down if we thought they were going to sort of get damaged. Put cable ties on all of the doors of the caravan and that kind of thing because we didn't want the lock breaking and suddenly the wind getting into the caravan and toppling it over. We have an Airstream caravan, so it's beautiful and very precious, and it would just be appalling if it got all crumpled up in the storm. So that was really lucky. And then on the day that the storm was, and there was gusts of sort of like up to sort of 100 miles an hour, I gather. And one of those gusts sort of demolished our neighbour's shed, and it broke into two parts, and it went soaring up. The top half went soaring up over our roof, and I heard this enormous crash, and then that broke into two bits, and one half went into the front garden where it lodged in the fig tree, and the other one went bouncing and ended up in the drive. But on this journey, this sort of half shed, it had been up on the roof where it damaged some tiles, but it managed to avoid the skylight. It managed to avoid all of the solar panels. So really, a few ridge tiles, no problem at all. But then when it bounced into the drive, it settled itself in between my car and the greenhouse, damaging neither of them, just lying sort of flat on the ground, where I could weight it down and it didn't go anywhere. And the only other damage that we had two other bits of damage up here. There's lots of fallen trees down in the woods, and my view on that is that fallen trees are quite good long term. With the wood that is sort of like at the edge of where we live, we leave it for the animals, birds, small creatures kind of thing. And although it's a great pity when you see a tree lose limbs or completely fall over, long term, I actually think it's probably quite good for the health of the wood. So I'm not going down there. I'm not going to check because wouldn't do anything. So there appear to be, from up here, there appear to be a lot of trees down, and that's fine. So the two things that actually did get damaged here, one was some trees. There is a little plum orchard between the caravan and the house, and two of the trees were damaged there. One of them was just ripped to shreds, and it has been taken down, chopped that down. And the other one, it was split in half. So we've cut off the worst damaged bit, and we're going to try and kind of like bring it up with ropes and stake it. We'll see. We'll see whether we can rescue that one. All other trees up here were fine. And the only other thing that got damaged was the polytunnel. And we had intended to replace the covering on the polytunnel this summer because it is 12 years old. And I have a bit of a funny relationship with polytunnels. I cannot grow lots and lots of things here without having a polytunnel. And I certainly couldn't grow lots of plants for sort of like commercial dyeing here without the polytunnel. It doesn't work. But it is plastic. So my kind of way of coming to terms with this is to make sure that the plastic lasts as long as possible. But last year we were very aware that it was beginning to reach its end of life. It was sort of rubbing where the frame goes over. And I'm thinking, you know, we are going to have to change that. So the storm has made that decision for us because it ripped it within an hour of the storm. I suddenly heard this bang. It's like an explosion when your polytunnel plastic goes. It's so violent. And I was able to go out there because the storm was quite gusty, and then it would go down to just heavy winds and it would go back gusty. So in the heavy winds, I went out with a pair of scissors and I slit all the plastic along one side. The other side had come off completely, and that just left the end. So I was able to pull that down and weight it down. Make sure that there was no bits of wood still attached to the plastic, and leave it there because I didn't want the polytunnel plastic drifting sort of on the winds, on these gales, over into some field, and we wouldn't know where it was, wouldn't be able to tidy it up. So then, with the polytunnel gone, I have to decide what to do because all of my plans for growing things this year were based on the fact that I would have lots of plants in the polytunnel from the end of March. And these are things that they're not necessarily half hardy, but they're on the less hardy side of hardy annuals. So with things like coreopsis, marigolds, black knight scabious, I had been going to put all of those into the tunnel because I know that I would get 3 or 4 times the size of crop than if I just have them out in the garden. So when it first happened, I thought, oh no, we have to get plastic back on the frame as soon as possible. And the problem with that is that if you do it in a rush, or if you do it in the cold, your covering just doesn't last as long. And what I want is for this covering to last the full 10 years again. Now I'm just going to go and let my dog in. So this is my quandary. Do I rush to get a cover back on the polytunnel so that I've got that early growing season? Or do I leave it with our original idea, which had been to change the cover June, July, when it's nice and warm, so you can stretch it really tautly. You get that nice polytunnel with no bits that can catch, and you know you don't lose your polytunnel cover as much. So I have made the decision that we're going to wait until the summer. It's a nicer job in the summer, and that means that I will sacrifice having somewhere to grow these early crops. And I've been thinking about it, and you know, they're all annual crops, and annuals are not as sustainable a thing to grow as perennials, and so on and so on and so on. And instead, I will have to be thinking a little bit more creatively and coming up with other things to dye my threads with. And are perennial and are probably native and are a bit more unusual, but will also mean a lot more education, a lot more telling people about these amazing dye plants, you know, like bracken or sweet cicely or iris, bog myrtle, all these kinds of things, and trying to explain and sort of buoy them up a bit, you know, just like big them up, saying these are actually really good dye plants. We don't just need to go for marigold and dyer's chamomile and so on. Anyway, it will be interesting. It will be interesting. That is my plan. And at the moment, we have the frame. And I was so glad that I managed to get the plastic off because way back in the day when I had a cut flower business, the plastic went and I wasn't here, and just the power of the plastic whipping in a gale just mangled the frame, and I ended up with a broken polytunnel. So I learned that lesson pretty fast because that was very expensive. So anyway, let's move on to the bulbs. If you have been a watcher of this channel for a while, you may remember that when I did a tour of the house, I showed on the top of the dresser that there was lots of very broken bowls. So like this one here, you can see it's all chipped and cracked around here. This beautiful mug, but you can see again, it's got a crack right the way down here and a great lump at the top. Now, I use these for really just once a year for planting up spring bulbs for the house. So I'm going to show you how I do it. Two different kinds of bulbs that I get. And the first is snowdrops. Now, at this time of year, now we are in the last week of January, snowdrops are the only flower that we have in the garden. And that's going to be the case, apart from maybe some hellebores in February, that's going to be the case until the end of March, really. So what I like to do is to bring some of those snowdrops in each year. And it's not a waste, because what I do is I choose a clump that either is in the wrong place, which was these ones. You can see they've got really short roots, these ones, because they had self-seeded into the drive, or that are overcrowded clumps. And I bring them in and I enjoy them inside. And then after they finished flowering, I replant them outside and I spread them around, and that is how the snowdrops begin to increase in the garden. So the other wonderful thing about snowdrops have an amazing scent. And part of that is that they're wanting to attract pollinating insects. So they've got this beautiful, sweet, delicious scent. But when they're down on the ground, unless you're going to go lying down next to your clumps of snowdrops, you don't get it at all. So by planting up small pots of snowdrops and having them in the house, I get to enjoy that scent. So I'm going to plant some snowdrops into this mug. First of all, just put some, this is just like normal potting compost. It's an organic, peat-free potting compost that I use for plug plants and bringing things on in the spring. So then I am just going to take my clump of bulbs here and squish it in. Now I've got some that are really short and then some are a little bit taller. So I'm just going to divide them and put them in quite loosely. This is the wonderful thing about bulbs, that they've got everything that they need in those bulbs. So you're not actually providing any more nutrients or anything at this stage. All I'm doing is putting in enough compost to hold them vaguely upright. And what you'll find is if you do this, that your bulbs look a little bit kind of like this for about 24 hours. And then they get themselves sorted out, they shuffle themselves around and they start growing. And this pot here will give me flowers. You see, these ones are out and they will last probably about a week or so. And then once the flowers have gone, I will just snip the stems. But all of these ones here have still to come. So overall, this little mug will probably last me 2, maybe 3 weeks if I put it somewhere cool. One trick is to have it somewhere nice and warm during the day so that you get that lovely heady scent, so you can see it, you know. I'm probably going to put this one on the table next to where I read. And then at night, just before you go to bed, bring it onto a cold windowsill, and that just gives it a little bit of a rest. So there is my snowdrops. And once it has settled down, I'm going to come back and put some moss around that. The other kind of bulb that I have is always just like garden bulbs. I've got hyacinths, which I'm going to show you in a minute, but also things like crocus or iris. And very, very simple, exactly the same. Pop some soil in the bottom there. Take your bulbs. These ones are iris, an iris called Blue Note. Right, you can see it's got a really nice root system already. So all I'm going to do is pop that in, sugar around a little bit to loosen the bulbs, and then start putting some soil just around. Right. Okay. Give it a little bit of a shake. Get rid of any air pockets, but that's all you need to do. So it's very, very simple. And then at the end, maybe I'll just bring this one back. I am going to just drape some moss. We have moss everywhere, particularly since the tunnel blew down. I'll be able to take the moss off the wood that's part of the tunnel that we're going to be kind of renewing, so I can go and take it from the old rotted wood. Right, and you can sort of tear it into little pieces and pop it there. And then afterwards, you can always return the moss to the garden. Just keep it damp, it will survive. Oh, here's another wee snowdrop bulb at the side. Now that won't flower, but it will flower next year. So I'll pop it in there, and that will mean that it goes out when they go. If I get any more moss, a teeny bit there. All right, and you can see that this is going to have, I'm going to clean it all up. I'll give them a good wipe after I've finished potting them. But it's going to have these beautiful blue flowers. You get 2 or 3 blue flowers from each of these, and a nice ball of moss and things. This is really nice to look at anyway, even before you get the flowers. And then at the end, I will just leave the flowers to die down. Make sure it's kind of like well watered, doesn't dry out completely, and I will plant them out in the garden for next year. These ones I think I'm probably going to plant into the grass, because I have seen iris growing beautifully in grass. So one's for me, and now I have a one here which I am planting up from my mum, and my mum loves hyacinths, and ever since I grew cut flowers commercially, I have been sending all hyacinth bulbs over to my parents. I can't grow hyacinths well in the garden at all. They'll be fine the first year, but they would never ever rebloom. So as a commercial flower crop, they were really not a starter. But every year now I have them for the house. And over the years, I have just been giving my mum and dad the spent bulbs, and they plant them into their garden, which is complete sand. Really, it's absolutely brilliant for bulbs. So the whole of their garden now is all of these hyacinth bulbs, but they will not flower until May, really. But my mum loves hyacinths, so I thought I would plant her a big bowl of hyacinths. Now, again, this is a bowl that has a chip on it, but she won't mind that. She's absolutely fine with chips. And I'm going to plant 9 hyacinths in here, and then I'm going to put twigs in it for her, so she can just put this on her table and it will look glorious and smell glorious for a while. So I've put in 6. This is the last pot to go in. I have soaked it so that it's nice and wet when it goes in. And then I will just tip it upside down. And very carefully, you see, because it's got really good roots here, you're probably going to hear it crackle a bit as I pull it. But that doesn't matter, as long as each of the bulbs has good roots, which you see still has good roots. And then I'm going to squash them in here. I always think that hyacinths, when they're sold in those pots and they've got the 3 bulbs really close together, by the time they've flowered, they kind of look a bit too big. Whereas if you can spread them out a little bit, like these ones, it just makes it much more relaxed and things. And then I'll put this big twiggy frame around it to support them, because hyacinth, you know, flowers, they're quite big and blousy and they have a tendency to go off. So next thing, exactly the same, pop compost in it. Now the compost, you're not wanting to squash it down particularly. It can be quite light and airy. Sugar it every now and again to make sure there's no air pockets, because you don't want the roots kind of coming out into air. They're fine just coming out into compost or water. I mean, you can just wash all of the soil off these and put them in water, and they will grow quite happily, like in a hyacinth vase. But what I do want is I'm wanting all of those bulbs to be proud of the soil, because you don't want them to rot. So there we go. That is going to be an absolutely stunning bowl of hyacinths. And what I'll do with the top of that one, I think, is I'll probably put some little stones over the top, but I'll wait until I've put the hazel twigs in it until I do it, because obviously then I'm going to have to pack it to take it through to my mum and dad's. So there we are. This is how I get myself through February, with the idea that there are some flowers in the house. I move them about. So I have snowdrops, iris, crocus, little crocus called Cream Beauty. And now I'm going to tidy up the table and my hands, and then wipe down all of the pots, water them really, really gently. I mean, you know, a tiny amount of water per pot, because they don't have drainage. So you don't want them to get too soggy, but I mean, they're quite happy. Bulbs are quite happy without the drainage, but you don't want to waterlog them. So very lightly water them. Clean up all the pots and then put the coverings on the top of the soil just to finish them off. And at that point, I will take a little video and show you it at the end here. And in the meantime, I hope that you have a lovely weekend, and I will see you next Friday. Bye-bye.